Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you all for joining us today as we are preparing for the holiday of Passover. It is truly an honor and a privilege for us to have this special Zoom call live from Israel with the chairman of ISGAP, which we're going to learn a little bit about. And of course, world-renowned refusnik and former Israeli politician, Natan Sharansky. And I could think of no more opportune time to have the honor of hearing from Mr. Sharansky than this year. First of all, Passover is all about freedom. And freedom is not just about physical confinement and imprisonment, but it's about inner freedom, finding the inner resolve and dedication to inner freedom from whatever it is that constrains us in our personal lives. And of course, Natan Sharansky is an individual who not only sat in prison for 9 years, but maintained his dream and his vision of joining his wife and making Aliyah in the land of Israel. And he realized his dream, and he's going to speak to us about how we could always maintain inner freedom despite our physical environment and circumstances. But especially this year, as we're watching the horrific, barbaric war that Russia is waging against the Ukrainian people and destroying and murdering countless lives, we are going to hear from an individual who understands the Soviet regime from the inside, who experienced their brutality and their hostilities and their evil ways, and was actually born in Ukraine. So what greater individual to hear from than Mr. Natan Sharansky. I just want to thank Mr. Natan Sharansky, and I want to thank ISGAP, a wonderful organization that we're going to hear from its director, Dr. Charles Asher Small, in a moment, for bringing us this special presentation. Mr. Sharansky is the chairman of this organization, ISGAP, and he's coming to us on behalf of ISGAP. And Mr. Sharansky actually spoke at the Palm Beach Synagogue many years ago. He was at the Breakers for Shabbat at an ADL conference, and he walked in and joined us for Shabbat morning and even spoke in the synagogue during the services. So it's an honor to have him back on Zoom. We actually had his Israel trip this summer, and Mr. Sharansky was scheduled to speak to our group on Saturday night, but he had come down with COVID just a few days before. So it's great to see Mr. Sharansky with us today, healthy and well. I'm going to introduce the director of ISGAP. Dr. Charles Asher Small is the founder and executive director of ISGAP and the director of the fellowship training program on critical anti-Semitism studies at Wolf Institute in Cambridge. Dr. Small was previously an academic visitor at St. Anthony's College, Oxford. Dr. Small is a prominent scholar and public speaker specializing in the fields of contemporary anti-Semitism, including the delegitimization of Israel and notions of Jewish peoplehood, social and cultural theory, globalization and national identity, social movements, political Islam, and racism, including anti-Semitism. Charles is the author of many books and articles, including the 6-volume Global Anti-Semitism, A Crisis of modernity. He has also convened groundbreaking academic seminar series in the emerging field of contemporary anti-Semitism at many universities, including Columbia, Fordham University, Harvard University, McGill University, and many other universities. It's wonderful to have Dr. Charles Usher Small with us, who will introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Natan Sharansky. Charles.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. It's an honor to be here with you and your congregation, and it's an honor for ISGAP to do this joint program with you and your congregation. I'll speak briefly about ISGAP and then have the honor to introduce Natan to everybody. So as the Rabbi said, my name is Charles. I'm the founding director of ISGAP. ISGAP is the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. We're an international research center that carries out seminars all over the world in English at top universities, in Spanish, and now in Arabic. We train professors at Oxford University and help them to create courses on critical anti-Semitism studies. When we started this program 10 years ago, there were literally no courses at universities on contemporary anti-Semitism, which is astounding. We have now more than 400 graduates from 25 countries, and they're teaching courses for credits in their home universities. We also train civil servants. We do international conferences and publications. And we're also doing a major study. We helped to launch a federal investigation into illegal funding and undocumented funding of American universities by the Muslim Brotherhood. And this, in the next few months, we're going to be coming out with findings that is showing the impact of illegal money funding top American universities and creating an environment, as we all know, that the universities have they're on the front line of anti-Semitism. On campus, our children and grandchildren are now sort of being exposed to anti-Semitism on campus, but also in the classroom. The intellectual environment is becoming increasingly hostile, not only to Israel and the delegitimization of Israel, but to Jewish American citizens as well at top universities. So our study is showing the correlation between severe anti-Semitism with funding of the Muslim Brotherhood, which calls for not only the annihilation of Israel, but of the Jewish people. And these people are funding our universities in the United States of America. So it's a very important project that will map and decode and understand the war that is taking place against our community. So that's some of the work we do. We have the great privilege and honor that Natan Sharansky is the chair of ISGAP. Our first chairman, Elie Wiesel, once said, he said this in 2003, that we're living in a time of a great urgency. And Elie Wiesel in 2003 was never so concerned with the rise of anti-Semitism since the end of the Holocaust, the end of the Second World War, as he was in 2003. When he said we're living in a time of great urgency, he went on to correct himself. And he said, no, we're not living in a time of great urgency. We're living in a time of a great emergency. This is what he said in 2003. And we know that in 2022, the situation globally and domestically is deteriorating. And it calls for our community to become aware and unite and fight and struggle against the anti-Semitism that exists not only in countries far away, but now in our midst, in the greatest democracy in the world, in the United States of America. And the irony is, in the 1970s and 80s, the international Jewish community, the diaspora community, Israelis, all united and supported the struggle of Soviet Jews. And no one more epitomized that struggle of an entire community than Natan Sharansky, who, as the rabbi said, had the moral courage to stand up and to live by ideals, Jewish ideals that were perhaps even higher than his own interest, his own self-interest. And he stood for his principles, for Jewish ideas and Jewish wisdom, and for the right of every Jew to live not only as a proud Jewish citizen anywhere in the world, but also to be able to live in Israel as a free Jewish person. So we're very honored that that Natan Sharansky is the chairman of ISGAP. And the irony is, we united in the diaspora to support the struggle of Soviet Jews. And in the 2020s, Natan Sharansky and others who are now free Jewish citizens are helping us in the struggle against anti-Semitism in our Western countries. So as the rabbi said, Natan doesn't need much of an introduction. He's known to the Jewish people and the human rights community as a true hero that lives by very high principles and moral courage. So Natan, thank you for joining us today again, and thank you for all the work you do, not only for ISGAP, but for the Jewish people and the human rights community. And as Pesach approaches, we know that in every generation we face challenges. So Natan, the floor is yours, and thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, everybody who found time from preparing your apartment for Pesach. I don't know how you find this time because my wife was already keeping me for 1 month on this special emergency for Pesach situation. But anyway, I'm glad that I can talk to you directly. I'm sorry that those of you who waited for me to speak when you were in Jerusalem, that I couldn't do it. And so, dear friends, I'm very honored to be the chairman of ISGAP, and I knew the work of ISGAP from its very first day, like what, 15, 16 years ago when it started. And I, as a Jewish agency chair, was using in our daily work of our shlichim, our representatives on the campuses. I was using the materials and the work of ISGAP Institute, and now to be the chair. And I believe that my biggest challenge in dealing with the modern anti-Semitism started like 20 years ago when I, as the minister of Israeli government responsible, among other things, for dealing with this fighting against anti-Semitism, discovered that though the attacks on Israel were growing with every day, but the leaders of the free world were absolutely not ready to accept that these attacks can in any way be connected to anti-Semitism. They were saying to me that you're trying to stop criticism of Israeli policy by calling it anti-Semitism. And then I really felt that we urgently have to make clear criteria. It was so obvious for me that when some European authorities coming to Israel and says, I visited refugee camps, that is the Auschwitz of today. It was so obvious for me that that's the anti-Semitism of today. I was in the refugee camps. It's really awful that Palestinians, 5th generation of Palestinians, has to live in these camps. We can debate who has to be blamed for this. And of course, we have a very strong position on this. But in any way, to say that that is Auschwitz of today, that is such a clear demonization of Israel. Or to raise again the question of legitimacy of Israel's existence in the United Nations, that's clear delegitimization of Israel. And applying to Israel demands, like in the movement of boycotting Israel, which is not applied to any other country in the world, whether democratic or totalitarian, that's clear double standard of Israel. And what I said that, look, delegitimization, demonization, double standard, these are the tools of anti-Semites for 1,000 years against Jews. And we have a long series of examples of double standard towards Jews by law and not by law, by delegitimization of Jews as a religion or as a nation, and of course demonization of Jews as those who are using the blood of Christian babies for their matzah and many others. And so now let's see if these same tools, or 3D tools, as I said, demonization, delegitimization, double standard, are used against Israel. It means that is anti-Semitism. And I am glad that the discussion which started and finished with the fact that all these 3Ds in one or another way are incorporated into the national definition of anti-Semitism. But the arguments continue, the debate continues, the anti-Semites are finding new and new ways to make a statement like the statement of Amnesty International that Israel is an apartheid state by definition from 1948. And they have to change the meaning of the word apartheid for this. So, and I have to say, for me, with my past, it was easy always to see the connection between old anti-Semitism, 3Ds against Jews, and new anti-Semitism, 3Ds against Israel, because of the very simple reason. Because in the Soviet Union, it was clear to every citizen that that is the same. So I was born, as it was mentioned, in Ukraine. Not only in Ukraine, I was born in Donetsk. I grew in Donbass. So practically every name of every city or village, which you hear and will probably hear in the next 10 days, because the battle for Donbass is now the heart of the war of Russia against Ukraine. So all of this reminds me of my childhood. Mariupol, the city which is practically erased, and now there is debate whether there are 15 or 20,000 people killed there. It was our summer camp town. We were going to spend the summer camp at the time because it was on the sea and it was such a nice place. So we grew there having nothing Jewish. We were absolutely assimilated. There was no bar mitzvah, no brit milah, no language, no religion, no place where you can learn anything about it or buy any book about it. The only real Jewish thing in our life was anti-Semitism. A lot of anti-Semitism in the street and by the government. And the conversation at home is that because you're Jewish, you have to be the best in your profession, physics or mathematics or chess or music, whatever, because that is the way of Jewish survival. So in the word Jew, which is written in the ID of your parents, Jew, there was nothing positive. There was only, it was like you are born with some kind of disease and you have to learn how to deal with this disease. And so the only medicine was your professional success, your professional career. So you live without identity and without freedom. And of course, from the age of 5, I know very well that we have no freedom, because my father tells me at the day of the death of Stalin, that Stalin died. It's a miracle for Jews. We were under big danger. And now, remember all your life, this miracle happened just at the moment of big danger for Jews. But don't tell it to anybody. Do what everybody does. And I go back to the kindergarten and I cry together with all the children about death of Stalin and sing songs about the son of all the people, Stalin. And I have no idea how many children are really crying or how many of them are crying exactly as I do, because my father told me. That is the typical life of Soviet citizens without freedom, when they have to do, to say, to act the way they are expected to do, but they know it's all lies. The real true life is only in your family, among the closest friends. And so you live with this, and you know very little about, as I said, about Jewish identity, but also about Israel. But you know that that is Jewish state. And everybody knows, not only you, everybody knows that the moment there starts campaign against Israel, Jews have a problem. And the moment there is another article against the Jews who are constantly treated with through stories demonizing them, or through approach of double standard. And Israel is treated in the same way. That's why it was easy for me to understand this connection. But to think that maybe you can fight against this unfreedom, against this double thinking, against these lies, you're not thinking about it, because there are no values in your life except from one value, and that's your professional success. And when it changed, when our lives were changed, 1967, when Israel emerged so victorious in this Six-Day War, and it was such a huge humiliation of the Soviet Union, which spent a lot of money and weapons on Egypt and Syria, and in fact started already celebrating their historical victory of progressive Arab countries over Zionist and imperialist agent Israel, and then such accumulation. But suddenly you see that people around you are looking at you and saying, how you Jews did it. And you understand, for these people, you're connected to Israel, whether you want or not, whether you know something about this connection or know nothing. And that's when you decide to start learning, to try to understand this connection. You start reading the books, mainly books brought by American tourists, Jewish tourists, and suddenly you discover that if you will decide, your history begins not from the great communist revolution of 1917, with all the awful things which happened after this, but your history can start from Exodus from Egypt. And it's such unique history, such interesting history, and it is so easy to feel that you continue living in this history, in this effort of Exodus, of becoming free. And then you discover that there are Jewish people, all these tourists who are coming from all over the world, who are telling you, oh, your father is from Odessa, and my father, grandfather, my uncles are all from Odessa. We are family. And you find out that all of them are your family. If you decide, they would say to you, we are all from Odessa, we are all from Manshtetl, we are all family, we want to help you. And of course, you discover that there is a state which is ready to send airplanes to the end of the world, but to help you to be free. This discovery of identity, that's what gives you the strength to start speaking about your rights, then about the rights of other Jews, and then in general about the freedom. And that's how I became activist, and with the time also like spokesman of Zionist movement and human rights movement. Of course, the word spokesman, as I discovered, is very confusing. People think that you simply go and make press releases. Every meeting with the journalist was in company with KGB, because foreign correspondents lived in 3 specially guarded houses. We call them ghettos. And you cannot meet and talk to foreign journalists without KGB being involved. And after every such meeting, you're interrogated, and there can be more searches and more threats. But you find out that it is a very important way to mobilize or to reconnect yourself to the Jews of the world, because our struggle could never succeed even one day if it wasn't the struggle of all the Jews of the world. You know, we are having demonstrations, successful demonstrations, 10 people standing for 5 minutes in the Red Square with the slogans, give us visas to Israel, free the prisoners of Zion. Why only 10 people? Because the more people know about demonstrations, the more chances that KGB will know. And then there'll be no demonstration. Why only 5 minutes? Even if KGB doesn't know in advance how long you can stand in the center of Moscow with such slogans, 5 minutes. And after this demonstration, there is punishment, which can be from a fine, from 15 days of imprisonment, or 5 years of exile. So the question is, why should you take such a risk? What kind of difference it can make? But if the demonstration is organized correctly, it means that at least one foreign journalist knows about it in advance. And that was the whole way of developing the secret codes and sending them through tourists to New York and then back to these correspondents. In order you can meet with them in front of KGB, speak about demonstration, KGB will not understand. So you have our demonstration, there is one journalist who comes and reports. When we are arrested that evening, Voice of America and Radio Liberty and Call Israel and many others are broadcasting all over the world. The 10 Jews were arrested in Moscow for their desire to go to Israel, and that is the fate of everybody and so on and so on. And next day, literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Jews all over the world start their demonstrations, their telephone calls to their senators and congressmen, their demands from their governments to act. And the Soviet ambassadors are called to the foreign offices. And American Senate is passing resolutions and amendments which link all the interests of the Soviet Union to this fate of Soviet Jews. Today, when we are unfortunately are in this tragic stage of sanctions, it seems like something very simple. But imagine what it was when President of the United States of America already decided to sign a free trade agreement with the Soviet Union because President of the United States of America, together with his Secretary of State, Nixon, Kissinger, together, want this policy of detente. They want very much to be more friendly with the Soviet Union, hoping that that will change the world. And at that very last moment, when they almost signed this agreement, the American Senate says no, that was the meaning of Jackson Amendment, without freedom of immigration of Soviet Jews, there will be no free trade. So that was the way how the world, through the energy of all this world jury supporting our struggle, how the world was building its pressure on the Soviet Union. And of course, then there were many years of struggle and many years of imprisonment and many years of the efforts of Soviet Union to isolate us, to tell me in prison that I'm absolutely alone in the world, that the Jews are afraid even to mention my name. And without any physical connection to the outer world, I knew they are lying. I was absolutely sure that Israel, Jewish people, my wife and my friends continue this struggle through every day. And that was giving us strength. And as a result, under all this pressure, Soviet Union, which was so weak from inside, and that's very important today when we are looking on regime of Putin, it's very important to understand the weakness of such types of regimes from inside. And when pressed from outside, collapsed, had to remove Iron Curtain. And the moment it removes Iron Curtain and gives permission to people to immigrate, it cannot survive, it falls apart. And as a result, millions of Jews went to Israel, hundreds of thousands went to other countries, and all the world was much more free place. And all this result of this unique discovery of the power of Jewish identity and unique feeling of solidarity, which connected all of us through Israel in this struggle. So today, we will go through many, many years after, and many, many battles which we had, of course, against enemies of Israel, against anti-Semitism, against new anti-Semitism, our own internal challenge in our resistance to assimilation, to our survival as strong and proud people. Sometimes it seems that the world made the full circle with what's happening now in Russia and in its aggression, barbaric aggression against Ukraine. But only think about this one very important difference which exists at this moment. When I grew in Soviet Union, in Ukraine, in Donbass, Soviet Union was a big empire with more than 100 different nationalities. So in idea of our parents was written Russian or Ukrainian or Armenian or Georgian or Tatarian. And it didn't matter what is written there because national identity was not something important in the Soviet Union. But there was one word which was important. If it was written Jew, as if you're chosen for the worst. You're having like this disease called Jew and you have to suffer. Today, when there are, unfortunately, tragically, there are millions of refugees from escaping the barbaric bombardments and destruction of the cities in Ukraine. Millions are moving to the western border of Ukraine, to Lvov, Ivano-Frankovsk, coming to the border of Moldavia, Romania, Hungary, and Poland, of course. And they also have different nationalities. And it almost doesn't matter what is written in their ID because their fate is the fate of refugees whose houses are burned and destroyed. But if it is written they're Jewish, if you are Jewish, it's changes, that's something chosen for the better. Because if you're Jewish, there are people on the border in all these countries, there are people on the border from Jewish organizations and from Israel and from Jewish agency who are waiting for you, who are not only waiting, like GPS, you call from any place in Ukraine and you tell them that you want to get out and to go to Israel, and they're like GPS, they're accompanying you through all the way, telling you where the car is waiting for you, where you have to take the train, where somebody can help you. They're helping you to reach the border. And then if you want to go to Israel, they're creating for you conditions in a few days to find yourself in Israel. If you want to join some other Jewish community, they help you. And of course, what's happening in Ukraine is tragedy for everybody. But the very fact that today, from having the word Jew meant almost like a curse put on you from your birth. Today, it's like a blessing. That is the big change which happened in the world because of the state of Israel and because of our Jewish solidarity. So with this, I want to summarize, I can go in many different directions to discuss our challenges and our problems of the past and of today. I'll be glad to do it in responding to your questions because that will help me to understand what interests you more. But in any way, I am very glad for this opportunity to talk to you before Pesach and to remind to all of us that though in every generation there are those who want to destroy us, but this desire to rediscover again and again our identity and to be free, that's what gives us strength to continue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sharansky. We really appreciate you taking the time right before Pesach. And I also want to thank our members, Elliot and Wendy Eisen. Wendy Eisen was very involved in the movement to free refuseniks from behind the Iron Curtain, including the release of Natan Sharansky. And I see Wendy and Elliot are on from Canada. So thank you.
I didn't know that they are on, but yes, I have to say that Wendy was the activist, one of the leading activists of a very important organization, the group of 35. And these young women united their efforts in London and in Montreal and in some other places. And they, together with Student Struggle, Union of Council, the other Jewish organizations, they really made wonders. And I thank everybody who was involved in that struggle.
Thank you, Mr. Sharansky. And if you want to type a question into the chat box, we'll present the questions to Mr. Sharansky. But I would like to begin with the first question. Going into the holiday of Passover, when each person at the Seder is trying to find personal freedom from whatever constrains them in their personal lives. You sat in a Russian prison for 9 years. You not only remain sane and normal, but you maintained your faith, your optimism, your hope. What did you learn from 9 years in prison that you can share with us? If a person is going through a personal struggle, how can they maintain their faith and their optimism under very dark and difficult circumstances?
Well, first of all, it is extremely important always to have a big picture in mind, that you are in the middle of historical struggle, the struggle which started thousands of years ago and continues. And this is the struggle in which millions of people are involved in the past, today, and in the future. And you have a very special role. It so happened you're blessed to have a special role. And that why word of you is maybe even more important than before your arrest. The fact that you were a few miles from this KGB prison in your home in Moscow, and you felt that you are part of all the Jewish world fighting for our release. And now you're moved a few miles and you're absolutely isolated and you're interrogated every day. But in fact, from the point of historical picture, nothing changed. And today, when you are saying no to KGB, it's even more important than before. So, then you have to keep this picture in mind for all these 9 years, for all these years and years of solitary confinement, for all these 405 days of the punishing cell. You have to remind yourself this big picture, because otherwise, really, you'll be lost. Otherwise, it will turn into this struggle for physical survival, and then it will be destroyed. So, first of all, remember how it is important, this connection with the Jewish people, with their past and with their future in your life. Second, of course, you have to be able to look a little bit from the side, to laugh on all this. You know, Soviet Union was such a, Soviet leaders were such a good object for all these anecdotes about absurdity of this regime, about stupidity or primitivism of its leaders. And there were many jokes, but they were underground jokes. But here, you're telling all these jokes to your KGB interrogators or to your prison guards. And they are sometimes very funny, but they cannot even laugh because it will be the end of their career. They have to pretend as if they are very angry on you. And then you tell them, you see, you want to tell me that I'm in prison. You cannot even laugh when you want to laugh. So you're in prison. So of course they try to irritate me, I try to irritate them. But again, mainly to remind yourself all the time what it is, the freedom that you have here, even as a prisoner. And you have also to use all your hobbies. And for me, my great hobby and my blessing was chess. So I loved from the age of 5, I loved to play chess, to win people who are taller than me. That was my philosophy, that the taller the person is, the quicker I have to win him. And because everybody was taller than me, so I was very ambitious. And then when I was already the champion of my school and my city, Donetsk, then I started playing simultaneously, and then I started playing without looking at the board, with a few people without looking at the board. And it was all hobby. But in prison, in the punishing cell, you can play thousands of games in your head, and you win all of them. And in the next game, you will turn the board and you will play for the other side, and you will find the improvement. You have enough time to find the improvement, and where you can win, where you lost before. So not only you're winning, you are improving intellectually, you're becoming stronger. And so there are some other tips which you can find if you read my book, Fear No Evil, or recently published book, Never Alone. So everybody who's thinking in the future about spending some time in prison, you can always find some good tips in that book.
Thank you, Mr. Sharansky. I have a number of questions coming in. What would you say to Jewish victims of Russian propaganda who have been brainwashed to believe that Russians are in Ukraine to drive out anti-Semitic Nazi fascists?
You know, frankly, I don't know if there are any Jews who believe in this propaganda. Definitely nobody outside Russia that doesn't believe in this propaganda, because everybody who knows the reality of the daily life, you know that Ukraine had many problems, but anti-Semitism is definitely not the problem. And the fact that the country could vote and to elect its president who is openly Jewish, who is proudly Jewish, it shows, it says something about the mood in the country today. But as we could see, unfortunately, very quickly, the Russian citizens went back to their state, double-thinking state of mind, meaning that they know that it is a lie, but they're afraid to say it publicly. The fact that so quickly and easily, relatively easily, President Putin could bring back this atmosphere of isolation, or at least informational isolation. Not you still can cross the border, but you cannot know what is really happening in the world if you're not making very special efforts. And the new laws which punish up to 15 years of imprisonment if you say something which irritates authorities. So the fear is quickly coming back to the former Russia. I don't think that there are any essential number of Jews who sincerely believes in this propaganda. But yeah, there are quite a few Jews who believe that, look, we had a good life. It will be back. We have to show some kind of sablanut, patience. What I can tell them, join those thousands and thousands who in this month decided to leave and come to Israel as quickly as possible. By the way, during this month, 300,000 non-Jews, in general, citizens of Russia left Russia urgently. Practically all my non-Jewish friends who had, of course, children, grandchildren, their children, grandchildren, in these months, everybody who could left Russia because they are really scared by this situation. And I think more than 7,000 Jews in Russia said, opened their files and are trying to leave as soon as possible. I do hope just in these days that some bureaucratic problems which still exist will be removed. And I believe that the number of those who will come from Russia will be at least twice as big as the number of those who will come from Ukraine.
Thank you. As a person who showed so much courage to stand up and fight the Russian regime, do you feel the world is doing enough to stand up to Russia today?
Well, first of all, I was fighting the Soviet regime, and that was a little bit different. It was a very ideological, anti-capitalist and anti-freedom regime of Soviet Empire. But if there is parallel with this Russian regime struggle, it's Russia which wants to become empire again. Whether it doesn't want to become Soviet empire because it doesn't believe in communism, but it wants to become like empire of Russian Tsars. And that's what makes it all dangerous. Look, I think it took time to the world to realize that we are not speaking about some dispute about piece of land between Russia and Ukraine. That in fact, we are speaking about the effort to change the order, the post-Second World War order in the free world, when all these institutions were created from United Nations and the European Union and all these agreements, all through Helsinki agreements, others, all this was created in order to build the world in which even if you live in the country which is weaker than your neighboring country, your freedom is not in danger. And that's now it's changed. The rules of the game changed. And from this point, Putin, with not only it is barbaric aggression, which is immoral and so on, but his great ambition of rebuilding Russian Empire means that now we will be playing by different rules. And that's very dangerous for the free world. And yes, I think that free world has to be mobilized fully and stop asking questions, what kind of weapons can irritate Putin, how we can help the Ukrainians without irritating Putin too much or without taking risk of bringing another world war to this world. We have to understand Putin failed in his understanding of the nature of Ukrainian people. He failed in his thinking that his army is very strong. He failed in his understanding of the nature of solidarity of the free world. But he was right in one thing, that I can use a threat and the world will be afraid. Because you have to understand, Putin is not big political mind or big diplomatic mind, and not big military mind. But he is great leader in criminal world. And in criminal world, you're a leader if it is clear to everybody that you can kill them any moment without thinking. You have a knife, he has a knife, and everybody has a knife. But he is ready to use his knife, and if necessary, his fists and his teeth any moment. And that's why everybody in the cell is afraid, and that's how he becomes a real leader. There can be people who are physically stronger than him, but everybody understands that he is ready any moment to risk his life and to fight, and the others are not. And that is what Putin understands very well. That's why he started, before going into the war, he started with his nuclear threat, and he made his training of the nuclear forces and putting them on alert. And in order, if somebody that didn't understand, he made it clear by saying that we are going to bring Ukraine where it belongs, to Russia. And if anybody will stand on our way, any country, he said, then they will be pushed in the way in which they were never struck in their history. So he made it clear to everybody, I'm ready to use nuclear weapons against you. And the immediate answer of the free world was to cancel those maneuvers of their nuclear weapons, which were prepared a year ago, which had nothing to do with this. But as Pentagon explained, we don't want to be responsible for increasing the tension in this question, and they're canceling. So when one guy is taking his knife out of the pocket, the other is putting it immediately back in the pocket, it's clear who will be the leader. So to some extent, Putin did succeed to neutralize, or at least to restrict the free world in responding to his absolutely barbaric, absolutely unjustified, awful aggression. Step by step, the world is coming back, understanding that is the battle for the future of the free world, and is mobilizing. But I have to say, we have to do it quicker. There is no place for 1 month discussions about whether we shall give them tanks or whether we shall give them airplanes, and our special secret we shouldn't, and we must have a whole agreement. The moment Putin now started the second phase of his war, it will be developing practically every day. And the West has to make some major decisions and implement them. It is the question of days and sometimes hours. We cannot permit our democratical decisions to be so slow. That's what I would say. And by the way, my criticism is, of course, not only about the leaders of the free world, but also about Israeli government. And from the day one, I was insisting that though Israel does have some very serious problems in Syria, because the free world gave the keys from the sky in Syria to Putin, and we have now to coordinate with Putin our attacks on the Iranian bases in Syria. In spite of this, the challenge is too big, and we have to be part of the free world, whether we are speaking about helping Ukraine, whether we are speaking about sanctions, or of course assistance to refugees.
Thank you, Mr. Sharansky. Would you venture to predict how this war is going to end?
Well, look, the short run, I would say that's what Andrei Yermak, the chief of staff of President Zelensky, told me 3 weeks ago. He said, it's so simple. He said, or America, I was on my way to America, that's why he was speaking about America. Or America will give us the weapons which we need, and then we will win much quicker than the world thinks and much quicker than we thought in the beginning, because we didn't know that we can be so effective and powerful against Russia and against Russian army as we know now. And he was saying it to me in the middle of the struggle for Kiev. And he said, if we'll get all the necessary weapons, we will win very quick. If not, he said, then it will be a long story and long tragedy, and we'll have new Mariupols, and Mariupol is the place which is practically raised, and new Kharkov. And Kharkov is #1 Russian city in Ukraine, meaning the Russian population, which is 1/3 already destroyed. So that's in the short run, I think that is the question. In the long run, I think Russia is doomed to fail. Putin's regime is doomed to fail. Putin said that Ukraine, in his famous speech before he started this war, his 45 minutes, and a very open, very candid speech, he felt already that he's now the king of the world. And he said, Ukrainians is not a nation, Ukrainians is not the state, it's artificial state. By the way, he fully repeated the words of Molotov after signing agreement with Ribbentrop about Poland. Molotov then said that Poland is not a real state. So he said, it's not a real state, it belongs to Russia and we'll bring it back. So in fact, I think Putin made more for building Ukrainian nation as one of the central nations of the modern Europe and modern world than anybody else in history. Ukraine as a nation never felt itself so uplifted, so strong as a so rising nation as today. But at the same time, Putin made an awful blow to Russia, to its self-respect, to its position among nations, to its philosophy of Russian intellectual debate about the place of Russia between the Western civilization and Eastern civilization. He destroyed all this. And so I believe Russia as a power, but also as a very important historical and cultural phenomena, is on a huge decline and the free fall. And so I believe that if you look at what's in the next 10, 15 years, the situation of Russia, or definitely of this regime, is very bleak. The situation of Ukraine is very promising. But okay, Jews are reminded again and again that you should not build on the good attitudes of the leaders at this specific moment, that we have our own history, and our history, of course, means also that we have to help to those who have problems, but we also have to make sure that we are strong people, we have strong state, and we continue our march together in history.
Mr. Sharansky, if I could just close with one last question. As a Jewish hero who endured 9 years of imprisonment to gain your freedom as a proud Jew, what is the most important message we can communicate to our children, to our grandchildren on Friday night when we sit around the Seder? When you look at the Jewish world in Israel and in the diaspora, what is your most important concern for our future? And what would you like us to share at the Seder table to our children at this pivotal time in Jewish history, with anti-Semitism raging around the world, with anti-Zionism, with terrorism in Israel, with Iran nuclear deal on the table still, with the war in Ukraine? What is the focus of this year's Pesach Seder for Jewish families around the world?
Well, there are many problems, you're right, the external problems, like those which are coming from Ukraine and Russia, or definitely a huge external problem coming with the Iranian threat and with possible deal. But then these are external problems which we know how to deal with them. We know how to fight, even if it would be very, very difficult. But we also, of course, also have our internal problem of disengagement, or the efforts to disengage between Jewish people and the state of Israel, with this message, which is coming again and again, that if you are the person of the world which you are concerned about freedom and human rights, you cannot be part of this Zionist ethnical state, and you know, all these awful words, which unfortunately so many Jews are repeating without even understanding its meaning. So I would say that the struggle for Jewry and exodus from Egypt, in fact, it's the same example that we Jews got our freedom when we left Egypt, and we got our identity 49 days after this on Har Sinai. And in fact, we became, at the same time, we became Jews as people. We are first called Jews by Paro, and after we left Israel, after we left Egypt. So we became people and we became free. So, and since then, for 1,000 years, we are fighting how to keep this connection between our freedom and our identity. In the Soviet Union, when I was activist of two movements, of human rights movement and Zionist movement, there were people on both sides who were saying to me, you have to choose. Or you are a person of the world or a person of your tribe. What is more important for you? And I felt it's nonsense. You don't have to choose, because if I have strength to fight for freedom in the world, it's only because I discovered my identity, and this is the source of my strength. When I had no identity, I couldn't fight for anything except of thinking about my own career. There were no values in my life. So today in the world, for those people, every Jew wants Tikkun Olam. If you're not dreaming about the better world, about Tikkun Olam, then probably you're not Jewish. So, and many young people are challenged with this. If Tikkun Olam is important for you, so stop being connected with the interests of this tribe, of this ethnical state. And what I'm saying to young Jews on campus and through our shlichim and many other ways, that don't believe that you have to make a choice. Tikkun Olam, bettering of the world, needs a lot of strength. And there is no other source of this strength than your identity. And you have nothing to be ashamed of. You can be only proud of this gift, having this history, having these people, having this state behind you. So, Leil Seder, this exodus from Egypt, reminds us again and again about our unique role in the world, which is divided by those who want to keep their identity and are ready to give away their freedom, and those who want to keep their freedom and are ready to give their identity. But we Jews have a special role in this world, to keep your identity and your belief in freedom together. And of course, Leil Seder is a good moment to remind us about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On behalf of our community, we want to thank you, and you wish your family a Chag Kasher v'Sameach. And we're praying that in Israel and around the world, the Chag HaPesach should bring real freedom from external and internal, struggles that we all. And thank you for taking the time to speak to us and inspiring us before Pesach.
Thank you. Chag Kasher v'Sameach to everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and looking forward to seeing everyone on the Chag HaPesach.